Hello, my friends. My name is George Kors, and today we are talking about another Eastern German author, although there's some complex stuff going on with that. Uwe Johnson and his work Jahrestage, or as translated in the English, Anniversaries. Big 4-volume set. And we're going to talk about the first 2 volumes. This is volume 1. I have got volume 2 here as well. And the reason why we're talking about volumes 1 and 2 today of the original German is because those are compiled into one volume in the most common English translation. So for those of you who are reading this in English translation, this will be about volume 1. I will do volume 2 later on. I've got those items right here for us to take a look at. Before I get started in that, though, we have had a great time on the channel here, folks. And if you want to support me, the best way to do so is to buy this book, Buy Always the Wanderer. The best way to support me, the best way to support these videos is to support my work. I am a novelist first. Love talking about literature with y'all, but I have to pay rent. Buying my book helps. Talking about my book, giving my book to your friends, all the best ways to support me. So if you have not done so already and you love the channel, you're subscribed, go ahead and buy a copy of Always the Wanderer right now. Let's get back to it. Uwe Johnson, this is Jahrestage, a huge, hulking 2,000 plus page work published over a decade plus from the 1970s to the 1980s. It appears in 4 volumes, and it has to do with Gesine Crespal. That is the main protagonist that we're dealing with in all 4 volumes here. Now, I want to introduce this as a 4-volume set written by an Eastern German author, and I've talked a little bit about Eastern German authors on the channel, and one of my goals here is to amp up some of the Eastern Germans I think who are not talked about. And I started with Christa Wolf. I have a video on Cassandra, which I'll link down below for you folks to watch, and you absolutely should check out Christa Wolf. This is another of Christa Wolf's novels, Nachdenken, Über, Christa, which is probably her most famous work, and I love the art on this edition here. Just a really evocative piece of painting on the front there. Christa Wolf, if you've watched the Cassandra video, stayed in Eastern Germany and was a prominent Eastern German fiction writer and freie Schriftsteller for her entire life. And, after the fall of the wall, we talked a little bit in that video about how Christa Wolf was panned for participating in socialist realism, for participating in the upkeep of the state, controversially being an informant for a little while. Christa Wolf's experience is that of somebody who lived through pretty much the duration of the DDR, of the Eastern German Democratic Republic. And if you are looking for that lived experience, you need to look at Christa Wolf. Now, Uwe Johnson has a separate experience. Uwe Johnson and Jahrestage, Gesine Crespal in Jahrestage, as well as Uwe Johnson himself, are individuals who lived in the DDR, in the Eastern German Democratic Republic, and then moved to the West. Uwe Johnson is a member of a famous Western German literary circle called Gruppe 47, Group 47. This is a group of very famous individuals who are seeking literary renewal in the period of post-war German politics. Other famous Gruppe 47 Mitglieder are Günter Grass, I think Ingeborg Bachmann, she was taking part in that, Siegfried Lenz, who I'll talk about in my recommendations later. And this was an influential and important intellectual circle of writers, particularly fiction writers, but writers more generally, who were seeking literary revival in that post-war period. Ferd says hello. Now, that post-war period is fraught because the German state, let me get this cat here. The German state is split in two in the post-war era. So we have the Western German Republic and the Eastern German Democratic Republic. These two states eventually develop a significant border system. The wall is very famous, and this means that Germans crossing over one country to the other, it is extremely fraught, extremely difficult, and not something that everybody can do. So Uwe Johnson, in contrast to Christa Wolf remains in the Eastern German Democratic Republic. Uwe Johnson does not. He begins his life in a collapsing state, in a collapsing fascist state, of course, and as a young person, and then experiences the establishment of both German states. And then he chooses, while being a citizen of the Eastern German Democratic Republic, to move to the West. And a lot of this is very complicated in Johnson's life. Uwe Johnson represents a really significantly complicated view of Germany. And you're going to find Uwe Johnson referred to in the German as Dichter beider Deutschland, the author of both Germanys. And this is a really complicated claim. He did experience both and was deeply critical of both. Uwe Johnson has no love for socialist realism. He has no love for the kind of corruption present in the Eastern German Democratic Republic. He sees it as flawed socialism, and also does not view the Western German Republic, the Bundesrepublik, as viable itself. He has a lot of extremely critical feelings about both. And this is why Jahrestage is such a complicated and interesting work. Because at the end of the day, Jahrestage, this huge work here, in looking at Gesine Crespal, we are seeing an individual who is having these incredibly critical and complex feelings about the German state. Now, Jahrestage, the way that anniversaries is formed, is really, really unique. And I think form is one of the things that people are going to talk about most with regards to this novel. But we need to go into it with an understanding of just how complicated Johnson's feelings are about Germany. Just like we needed to go into that novel Cassandra with a really complicated view of how Christa Wolf views the Eastern German state, we do need to keep that in mind and stay grounded here with both of these, with all four volumes, of course, because this notion of two Germanys is emblematic of the form in the text. Now, the text here itself takes the form of a journal. It's part journal, part stream of consciousness, part self-reflection, part discussion with Gesine's child, Maria. And it goes day by day. So volumes 1 and 2 here go from the 21st of August, 1967 to the 19th of April, 1968. And those dates are important, of course, but we go day by day. And Gesine is reflecting each day on her experiences. Now, like Johnson, Gesine is a former Eastern German, still an Eastern German. Eastern Germany still exists in the 1960s, of course. So she is an Eastern German. She has left Eastern Germany for the West, and she is living in Manhattan in New York City. And she is a single mother with her daughter, Maria. They live in an apartment in the Upper West Side. probably back when the Upper West Side was able to be lived in affordably. And Gesine is chronicling her life. But Gesine is also telling Maria, her young daughter, the family story. The story of her parents, how her parents met, how she was born, her childhood, her young life. And what we have is a duality of Gesine's experience in the present day, which is present to the 1960s, and her father's experience and her mother's experience to the 1930s and 1940s. And we see these two different narratives happening in tandem, where we have Gesine and her daughter experiencing the social upheaval of the late 1960s with particular regard to social commentary. And I want to make it clear that Uwe Johnson's social criticism is not limited to both Germany's in this case, but is also focused on the United States, on the Soviet Union, on a wider variety and scope of different nations that are present in the 1960s. So that is a major part. Social criticism is a major part of the entirety of this work. And then we see, Gesine's parents living in that development of fascism, that realization of fascism in the 1930s, and that utter decline into sort of societal madness that the German state is experiencing as it succumbs to far-right fascist leanings. And we see just the complicated feelings that her parents have about this uprise and this uptick in hatred and fascism. And both of these narratives sort of side by side, serving this, duality of experience, is incredibly well done, because we sort of flow in and out of Gesine's narration with extreme fluidity. That's a tautology there. We flow in and out with ease between these more historical retellings of her parents' individual experiences, and then her own experience in this moment. Now, the form is even more greatly complicated by the fact that Gesine insists on reading the New York Times, or as she refers to it as the Tante Times, every day. And one of the very unique things that you're going to find in this narrative, in this novel, are direct quotations from the Times and very, very frequent social commentary on the New York Times, on direct articles. And there's a resource that I'm going to drop down below for those of you who are reading this in the original German, that is maintained by the Universität in Rostock. These are annotations to all 4 volumes of Jahrestage, of anniversaries, and they are really invaluable. The University of Rostock has gone ahead and compiled a list of the complete, basically the complete New York Times articles that are referred to in here, which are multitudinous, hundreds of them. And likewise also has just really rich annotations throughout the text about all sorts of different material there. And if you are reading the original German, you have my recommendation to accompany your reading with those Anmerkungen, because they are really, really fantastic. Now, getting back to this. The New York Times plays this huge role in reflecting society back at Gesine as she is trying to understand what she should be doing. She comes from the state that's subdivided, that gave into genocide, gave into hatred and racism and homophobia in spectacular ways, is then subdivided by other nations. She then emigrates with her child to a different nation and isn't sure where she and her daughter are going to live long term. And this state of flux, this unknown, this sort of abyss that we see Gesine navigating is just psychologically pounding her down. You can feel it throughout the text that this is weighing on her every step. She's not sure. Should they continue living in the United States? Should they return to Germany? Should they go to a different country? What is a the best realizable path for Crespal and her daughter? And it is a really complex question. And that give and take that she has with the New York Times is really thoughtful. And I think for my American readers, I think you'll appreciate Uwe Johnson's skepticism of corporate media as well, because Uwe Johnson is talking about the New York Times in a way that I think a lot of critical readers would be thinking about corporate media and corporate media's interests, particularly with how the New York Times is portraying the Vietnam War. I think we see an early example, not an early example, a further example of corporate interests interrelating with government interests, and the portrayal of that war just being a really complicated rhetorical situation. So Johnson is doing this really, really well. This is that present to the 1960s. And then we're bouncing back and forth to these earlier narrative, which is completely fraught, extremely difficult, of the Crespals in Mecklenburg. And this whole notion of, where should they be living? We had that same discussion about Gesine's mother and father. Where should they be living? Because Gesine's parents, at one time before the war, before 1933, are living in the UK. They're living in the United Kingdom. And we see Gesine's father having the same sort of question about migration and where is safest to be a family. And I think, one of the grandest sort of takeaways that I'm having from Jahrestage, from anniversaries, is this complicated discussion and unpacking of migration and where is it safe to be safe. And this is a question that's near and dear to many Eastern Germans, because that wall, that border that is constructed between Eastern and Western Germany in the 1960s and 1950s, 1960s, that greatly complicates the feeling of home, greatly complicates the feeling of where can one go, what's mobility, where should one be, where is one safe, where can one express themselves. And in a larger way, personally, as a thinker right now in the United States, migration, this is one of those ideas of the ages. This is one of those ideas that might be one of the most important notions to us intellectually right now in our moment. And why I'm suggesting Johnson second amongst the Eastern German writers that we're looking at here is just because of that complicated feeling about migration that's present in anniversaries. Jahrestage really speaks to a deeper desire, a deeper human desire for us to find safety and stability. And this notion of safety and stability is really fraught for the Eastern German and for the Western German. And I think this is why some critics might be inclined to refer to Johnson as the Dichter beider Deutschland, because that notion of being the writer of both Germanys is fraught in what is one's home, is fraught in where does one belong. And these are questions we're asking ourselves right now. These are questions that open up whatever social media you want. And pretty much regardless if somebody's, a centrist or a leftist or a far-right fascist, they are probably talking about this topic, right? And that, that is a really important aspect of the Eastern German experience as well. So to my taste, Uwe Johnson does deserve this wider recognition, I think. Much like Christa Wolf deserves wider recognition for really unpacking these ideas that are perennial, that are occurring time and again, and that are highly relevant to us right now. Returning to Jahrestage, returning to anniversaries, there are a couple aspects of the text that I would really strongly recommend reading in the original German, and I've spoken to a few folks. I want to thank my buddy Seth over at Waste Mailing List and a few other folks I've talked to about their English translation of this that they've read. And I just want to encourage you to, if you're able to read in the original, to pick it up and check out the original. And there's a really distinct reason why here. And that is that the original, which is written in Hochdeutsch, in High German, this language all of a sudden becomes another fluid factor in the text, because not only do we have the Hochdeutsch, but we also have Plattdeutsch, and this really distinct regional dialect of Platt German, which most of my German viewers out there are going to be like, I probably don't even understand it unless you're from Mecklenburg. You're probably not even understanding Platt. Plattdeutsch is so complicated. And again, check out down below those annotations from the University of Rostock, because they gloss most of the Plattdeutsch for you. And this is a very distinct dialect of German that is spoken in Mecklenburg, where the historical narrative of Gesine and her parents is taking place. And we see that interweaving of dialect and the predominant variant of Hochdeutsch. That is extremely well done. I've talked about this on the channel before, but doing dialect, doing accent, this can be done in a really hokey way. It can be super cheesy. It can fall flat. Johnson was doing it masterfully, did a very fantastic job. And that's not all that we have here. One of the other things that we have is Johnson translating those New York Times articles into German. And we see all kinds of translation German, and I will call this Übersetzungsdeutsch, which are these hokey translations, intentionally funky translations of the English into the German. And I was speaking with a friend, and I shared a couple sentences with him, and he's like, that is such a weird way to express it. And that was really intentionally done by Johnson. I really firmly believe that is a really intentional way that we're seeing Gesine and Maria experience life in America, and we're seeing them kind of be, inelegant translators of the English as they're teaching themselves the English by translating it into the German. Very subtle, very wonderfully done. In addition, we also see English pretty frequently, and we also see some Czech in here as well. And just there is a richness of language in here that is very modernist in its sensibility. And it's just very, very well done. Particularly, and I have to highlight again, the Plattdeutsch and the Hochdeutsch. The High German and the Platt German, those in juxtaposition with each other are really, really fantastically done. Because, like I said, not only we have these, sort of social commentary reflection that Gesine is dealing with her journal and her discussions with her child, but also we have these stream of consciousness moments where Gesine is talking to her dead family members, or talking to her father, and they are talking back and forth, and sometimes that Mecklenburgisch, that Plattdeutsch just slips in, and that is just so fantastically done in the original. I don't have a copy of the translation right here, and like I said, a few of my pals were able to send me pictures from theirs. I don't know that in reading the English translation that we're going to experience that, and I think that is as we talk about the larger issues with translation, the larger reason why translation itself is an art, and it's a difficult art at that. I think one of the reasons why that can be so difficult is because it is very, very nuanced how we portray um, something like dialect and a distinct dialect, nonetheless, in the translation. To my knowledge, I'm not sure that the English translation is going to afford you that experience. And I think, to me, that was one of the biggest experiences I had with the novel, was just really enjoying how flexible German became, as Uwe Johnson was working through it. Um, to that end, it's a very different linguistic experience than a lot of other German novels, and I thought it was really, really well done. And I think my German viewers here, you folks might be put off by the Übersetzungsdeutsch. I don't think it is going. I think you're gonna read it as cheesy or funky, because it does have that kind of weirdness to it. But there's an intentionality there that I really, really appreciated, and seeing this really dynamic language on the page, I thought was just really, really beautifully done. And I thought it was really, really excellent. And it does make me curious to get my hands on the complete translation, to take a look at and really do a deeper assessment of how the translation renders this. Because I think it's possible, in my head, I'm thinking through a couple of different possibilities of how I might envision the Plattdeutsch or the Übersetzungsdeutsch articulated and translated into the English. And, I would be very interested to see how the different translations do it. And I'm not familiar with the other translations of Jahrestage, of anniversaries. So if you're reading it, if it's translated into your own language, Spanish, Arabic, whatever, let me know in the comments, because that is something that I'm definitely very interested in. And I think Johnson was very interested in that interchange of language and how language changes as we're individuals moving through different societies. I thought that was, a really thoughtful aspect of these first two volumes here. The first two volumes, I think, to zero in on them specifically, from August to April, this is a time of significant social upheaval in the United States. So there's a lot going on in terms of the social commentary that Gesine is sort of building here. And that's definitely something to pay attention to. There's a lot going on in the Soviet Union. There's a lot going on in the United States. The Vietnam War is at a fever pitch. It's a build-up to the 1968 election. We know it was a consequential and very complicated election. It's also, we're dealing with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Just a lot of social upheaval in those moments in these first two volumes that you're going to find in volume 1 of the English. And the historical narrative of Gesine's parents, that is basically from 1930, right around the few years before Gesine's birth in 1933 to 1933. We know is a hugely consequential year for Germany and for Europe, of course. And then through much of the Second World War. So we see depictions of the Nazis arriving in the village where they live and taking administrative roles, and this is the way that the way that this occurs historically. It can be, I think it can be a very harrowing read for Americans out there right now. I think you're going to see a lot of unfortunately a lot of far right commonalities between some of the actions that we see in the village where Gesine's family is and where she's raised, and what's happening right now. We also see Kristallnacht. We see the rise of the war and the violence and the genocidal fascist violence that is articulated. And it's very harrowing, and seeing that going back and forth, understanding Gesine as a narrator going through that in childhood, is just really, really, really complicated. And I think it's also extremely timely. And I think it was very, very well done. These first two volumes zeroing in on, Gesine's upbringing from 1933, born in, one of the most consequential years in in Europe's history. it's complicated stuff, and I think as much as I'm going to praise Uwe Johnson for form and for experimentation with language and recognize Johnson as being a really masterful modernist in those ways, the narrative itself is deeply compelling and deeply moving, deeply emotional. And I think, like, what are the commonalities? I don't think that there's going to be a lot of commonalities drawn between Christa Wolf and Uwe Johnson. And I think, politically they would have differed, of course. Um, and their writing is different. But I think one of the commonalities that I think Christa Wolf is going to have, if you're reading Cassandra and you really like it, or Nachdenken über Christa T, and you really like it, you get into Uwe Johnson, and I think one of the ways that you're going to find that commonality there is the psychology of both of their writing. Christa Wolf really impresses me, is a master at developing psychology, delving into complex psychology, and just looking at, the human psyche as this vibrating, squirming thing. And doing so in like the most concise fashion possible is just, I've said this before on the channel, it's a hats off moment. When you're a novelist, you have to game recognizes game. You have to recognize when somebody is really extremely talented. Christa Wolf is of course at that highest level. And Johnson is getting there as well with the psychology of Gesine. I'll say, between the two, I might prefer the psychologizing that Wolf does, but Uwe Johnson is just doing a really fantastic job at having this large, looming universe. I think one of the major things that's going to probably dissuade individuals, however, from reading this is just the sheer length that Jahrestage has. So through in the original German, volumes 1 and 2, these two volumes are over 1,000 pages long. It's like 1,008 pages with there's an additional little like sort of commentary at the end. So it's over 1,000 pages in the first two volumes, and it keeps going. So I think just in terms of the way that a large novel can be challenging to folks, we see folks get really, being challenged by War and Peace, for example, very reasonably so. In Search of Lost Time is going to be, just as long, if not longer here. The length is prohibitive. Now, fortunately, if you're reading it in the original, it's split into those 4 volumes. So you can approach those volumes at your leisure, take your time with it, and know that you've got more awaiting you. I think I like that. I like the massive size here. And that's another sort of dichotomy with Christa Wolf. Christa Wolf's novels are so short, so concise, and packing so much in them. And Johnson's are, so long, particularly Jahrestage specifically, I should say, is so long. It's just a really, these writers are giving us lots of different opportunities, depending upon the kind of novel we want to read, to engage. And that's another reason why I wanted to go from Christa Wolf over to Uwe Johnson, is because Christa Wolf, I think, is a fantastic introduction to the Eastern German writer because the novels are so short. While I think most of Wolf's novels are probably out of print in the English, you can find used copies pretty reasonably. And Johnson, Anniversaries is super long. If you want something that's hulking and gigantic to take on, I think Anniversaries or Jahrestage is a really fantastic place to look. At the end of that day, I think what both of these authors, these Eastern German authors, are affording us, and I hope to continue amplifying them, is just this really complicated, view of what home is. These are some fundamental human questions. And a fundamental view of what do we think the world should look like? What kind of state do we want to live in? Is a question that many might take for granted, depending upon where they live in this world. And yet it is a provocative and important bit of philosophical thinking that we should all go through. And we see the ramifications of the complex feelings that Johnson has, the complex feelings that Christa Wolf has. We see these complicated feelings still to this day in Germany. The rise of the AfD, the rise of the far right in Germany again is, another representation of this sort of shattered identity crisis that might be going on there, that a lot of individuals have. And it is also deeply reflective of, how difficult, realizing politics is anywhere. It's very important to consider these things, because if you're viewing this out there and you feel under threat by the far right, which you should, we need to really unpack, where have we come, what is going on, why is this happening? And we're not the first ones to go through this, and we certainly won't be the last ones to go through this. And it's really, really important to reflect on that. This is why we study history, and this is why time and again on the channel I refer to novels as some of the best historical items out there. You absolutely can go out and buy a history and read it, and that's good, and you should do that. However, a novel, something that is written, with this perspective, with this experience in mind, it is one of the best possible historical documents that you can have. And when we're, if you're in the United States right now and we hear time and time again all over the place, the United States is so polarized. There's so many different visions for what, this country should look like, how it should govern, how we should be as a society. This is not new. This has happened in every society. This will happen in every society. These deep and complicated feelings are human. And at the end of the day, one of the best ways that you can aid yourself in attempting to be a moral and thoughtful and ethical person, regardless of your religion or your upbringing or your class or where you're at, is to refer to how others have done this before you. So, reading a novel by Christa Wolf, and then reading, maybe volume 1 of Jahrestage by Uwe Johnson, what an incredible way for you to enrich your own feelings by reflecting on somebody else's. And literature is fun too. I talk very seriously these days on the channel about literature, but literature is fun too. And seeing Christa Wolf just be a master at psychology is just really cool. And seeing Uwe Johnson experiment with the language and seeing how that language is exercised inside of the text itself is really cool. It's really fun. It's really engaging. So to a certain extent, there's a lot to be had here, and I would really recommend, if you're thinking about a deeper dive into German literature. And I see it, because I've done quite a few videos on German literature. I see quite a few individuals who are hoping to do so. We can't ignore the Eastern German perspective any longer. And I think that there is an American and a Western German tendency to do so. I time and time again, I think, American exceptionalism, having won the Cold War, this drives Western Europeans, particularly Western Germans, the French, the English, and U.S. Americans to just reject the writing of Eastern German writers, and that is a huge intellectual mistake. And I'm not here to espouse, whatever politics that you want to get into on that. However, I think, delving into Christa Wolf, delving into Uwe Johnson, and just looking at how complicated our situation is really, really important. And I think it's also really fruitful intellectually to do so. I will do another video on parts 3 and 4 of Jahrestage. And we'll get into it a little bit more. I think the overall work does demand a larger dive, to be sure. And I'm also going to do more videos on Christa Wolf also. So we'll have more coming out about Wolf as well. Um, in terms of my recommendations today, I have just one quick recommendation that I'm going to throw out there. Another member of the Gruppe 47, and this is Siegfried Lenz, and this is the novel Deutschstunde. This is a Rahmenerzählung, a frame narrative, um, and I think it's translated into the English as German lesson. This is a novel that I don't see talked about so frequently, but it is pretty. I guess I should qualify that. I don't see this pretty frequently talked about in English-speaking circles, although it is widely read in Germany, and you can see this is my Süddeutsche Zeitung Bibliothek version, which is the Süddeutsche Zeitung did a nice sort of like, here's 50 novels list. Maybe I should do that list as well. I've done a few lists, but they put out these novels as important novels to read. And I think Deutschstunde, German lesson, the German lesson is a really, really excellent reflection philosophically on the state and collapse and all these feelings that we're seeing Uwe Johnson talk about a lot, that we're seeing Christa Wolf talk about a lot. There's this undercurrent there, and I think Siegfried Lenz is a really, really fantastic writer, and the language here is really, really good. And also, to sort of tempt you into this as well, there's a lot of sort of physical art and painting stuff in here as well. So if you like something like The Recognitions or other writers who talk about painting a lot, you might like the German lesson as well. This is my only recommendation for right now, outside of engage in some Eastern German literature. If you do really think that you are a German lit person, or if you think hey, I'm interested in this for XYZ reasons, don't reject the Eastern Germans. Don't make the intellectual mistake of that. There's a lot of richness to be had from engaging here. As always, just bring some intellectual curiosity here. And that's what we're looking for. And I think that that's going to be a really enriching experience, to have that curiosity about what's going on here. And as always, I try to only talk about timely literature on the channel. And I think, Johnson, Uwe Johnson and Siegfried Lenz and Christa Wolf, I think these are timely writers. And I think the argument can be made that all literature is timely because the human experience is ubiquitous. No matter our technology, no matter our status, the human experience of emotion and psychology and society, these are ubiquitous experiences. But I think the argument can be made that reading Anniversaries right now would be a really timely experience for you. Same thing with reading Cassandra by Christa Wolf, and I've got the deep dive for that down below. I want to thank you folks so much for spending some time with me today and talking through some literature. Go ahead and let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. If you've read Anniversaries, or if you've dealt with part of Anniversaries, let me know your feelings here about it. I'm particularly interested in those who are dealing with the translation, because I really just want to know more about how translators are approaching this language issue here. Because it was one of the most outstanding things, outstanding in the sense that it stood out to me significantly throughout the text, and it was one of the things that I experienced a lot of, and it really left me with a lot, that language. So so thank you for spending some time with me today. Again, like I said up top, if you like these videos and you want to support me, please do buy Always the Wanderer. It's the best way to support me, and the best way to show your support is to buy this novel, buy it for your friends, talk about it. Independently published authors, we need you to support us, and the best way to do so is to buy the novel. So thank you for doing that. If you want to find out more about me as a writer, as a novelist, as a thinker, as a person, you can go to my website, georgekors.com, to find out more. You can follow me on socials that I may or may not use at gbk7288. I'm not posting on TikTok anymore. I'm only posting on YouTube now. YouTube and Instagram are my main guys, so you guys can follow me there. And otherwise, just thank you so much for participating in literature. I hope that your reading practice is going very well. And stay safe. Okay? Thank you again so much for spending some time with me. And I'll see you folks later. Thanks a lot.